Imagine this. It's 1958. Britain is still recovering from the war, and national service is a rite of passage for young men. Then, along comes a film that takes the strict, regimented world of military training and turns it into a riot of laughs. That film, Carry On Sergeant, the very first in what would become one of the most iconic comedy franchises in British cinema history. But here's the thing. When Carry On Sergeant was made, no one expected it to launch a series. There was no grand plan.
I feel distinctly encouraged at the prospects. Don't disappoint me.
No idea that this would be the start of something legendary. It was just a modest little comedy produced on a tight budget, hoping to entertain audiences. And yet, here we are, over 60 years later, still talking about it.
I'm still a civilian, with civilian rights. And don't shout, please.
So, what made it so special? Let's dive in. At the heart of the film is Sergeant Grimshaw, played by William Hartnell. Now, most people today probably associate Hartnell with Doctor Who, as he was the very first Doctor in 1963. But before stepping into the TARDIS, he was known for playing tough, no-nonsense authority figures. And Grimshaw is exactly that. A career soldier, counting down the days to his retirement when he's handed one final batch of recruits.
It's not the custom, so don't do it. Understand?
Oh yes, I understand.
Grimshaw makes a bet with Sergeant O'Brien, played by Terry Scott, that he'll finally whip a group into shape and win the prize for best platoon.
Because we're leaving the army in 10 weeks and the last chance.
50 quid says no champion platoon.
But when his new recruits arrive, he quickly realises he's in trouble. First up, there's Horace Strong, played by Kenneth Connor. Horace is a chronic hypochondriac.
Why didn't you warn me?
Corporal!
Absolutely convinced that he's too sickly for service. His constant trips to the medical officer, played by Hattie Jakes, provides some of the film's best running gags.
Boom, 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 boom. That's it.
That's your heart beating, normally.
Then we have Charlie Sage, played by Bob Monkhouse, who receives his call-up papers in the middle of his wedding breakfast.
How can it be my call-up, Dad? You sent off an application for a 28-day extension for the wedding.
Much to the horror of his new bride, Mary, played by Shirley Eaton. Charlie's situation sets up one of the film's key subplots. Mary, determined to spend her wedding night with her husband, smuggles herself into the depot and takes a job in the NAFI canteen.
My name's Mary.
I don't care what your name is, as long as you can cut chips.
This leads to plenty of close calls and mix-ups as Charlie tries to keep his military duties and his new marriage from completely falling apart.
And tonight's our wedding night.
Then there's Private James Bailey, played by Kenneth Williams, a supercilious intellectual who thinks he's far too clever for army life.
What is your name? Please.
Bailey, James Bailey.
Williams, of course, would become one of the defining faces of the Carry On series, known for his exaggerated expressions and razor-sharp delivery. In this film, he's already in fine form, constantly clashing with his fellow recruits and using his extensive vocabulary to complain about everything.
Grimshaw tried the experiment of deliberately putting a brake on his disciplinary powers.
We also meet Peter,
You like it? Where have you been?
played by Charles Hawtrey,
I got locked in somewhere.
whose delicate mannerisms and nervous energy make him one of the least convincing soldiers you could imagine. Hawtrey's style of comedy, which relied heavily on his fussy, high-pitched delivery, would become a staple of the Carry On films. And let's not forget Miles Hayward, Terence Longdon,
Very nice too, but I happen to be a national serviceman.
a well-spoken upper-class recruit who doesn't seem entirely sure why he's there, and Herbert Brown, Norman Rossington, who is, well, a bit of a disaster.
She was like you. You're clever. But I was always at the back and you don't have to talk fast.
From the start, it's clear that this lot has no hope of becoming a champion platoon. They can't march in step, they fumble every drill, and their training exercises always seem to end in disaster. And yet, Grimshaw doesn't give up. Instead of barking orders, he tries a different approach, treating them with patience and psychology rather than shouting. The results? Not exactly promising. One of the funniest sequences involves the squad attempting to complete a training exercise with a Bren gun, which, of course, goes hilariously wrong. Another highlight is their first attempt at marching in formation. Utter chaos. But underneath the comedy, Carry On Sergeant has a surprising amount of heart. Grimshaw, despite his frustration, actually cares about his men.
I've seen better.
And even though they drive him up the wall, they come to respect him. The turning point comes when the squad overhears Grimshaw venting his frustration, admitting that he's completely failed in his final challenge.
I wish it had turned out the way you wanted it. You were the head of a champion platoon.
Didn't give them to every man to achieve his life's ambition. Certainly not to me.
Realizing how much this means to him, the recruits decide to pull together.
Horace, we've decided to knock their eyes out tomorrow, to come right out on top.
Okay.
Against all odds, they pass their final tests and win the prize for best platoon.
The champion platoon is Able Platoon, Platoon Sergeant, Sergeant Grimshaw.
It's a genuinely touching moment, showing that teamwork and determination can sometimes make up for lack of skill. Now, let's talk about where Carry On Sergeant was filmed. Like most of the early Carry On films, it was shot at Pinewood Studios. The outdoor scenes were filmed on location, creating an authentic military training camp setting. But since the budget was tight, only around £73,000, the filmmakers had to be clever with how they used their resources. And what about the box office? Well, despite its modest production, Carry On Sergeant was a huge success. It brought in over 10 times its budget,
Oh, whatever's happened to you, Horace?
You answer the questions, kid.
proving that British audiences were hungry for this kind of light-hearted, relatable comedy. Critics were mixed. Some dismissed it as simple slapstick, while others appreciated its charm. But the numbers spoke for themselves. The film's success got producer Peter Rogers and director Gerald Thomas thinking, what if they did it again? Not another army comedy, necessarily, but another film with the same style. Ensemble cast, broad comedy, and plenty of mishaps. That led to Carry On Nurse in 1959, which was an even bigger hit. And from there, the Carry On series took off, spanning decades and producing 31 films. Looking back, Carry On Sergeant is a fascinating piece of cinema history. It doesn't have the innuendos and double entendres that later Carry On films became famous for. Instead, it's a gentler, more character-driven comedy, built around slapstick and misunderstandings rather than risque humour. In many ways, it's closer to classic British comedies of the era, like the Ealing films, than to what the Carry On series would later become. But what makes it stand out is its heart. It's a film about underdogs, about struggling through something you're terrible at, and against all expectations, coming out the other side. It's a film that celebrates teamwork, perseverance, and, most importantly, finding humour in even the most frustrating situations. So, if you've never seen Carry On Sergeant, give it a watch, not just as a piece of film history, but as a genuinely entertaining, well-crafted comedy. It might not have been designed to launch a franchise, but it did something even more impressive. It made audiences laugh. And in the end, that's what really matters.
£50. God, blimey.